Mariana Explorer's ROV feed showed nothing but darkness at 8,431 feet when the anomaly first appeared. I'd piloted remotely operated vehicles for 12 years by then, done hundreds of pre-drill seafloor surveys, but I'd never seen anything like this. It started with a temperature reading that made no sense. The water around ROV 217 jumped from 3 degrees Celsius to 27 degrees Celsius in under 30 seconds. Then came the vibrations. Not the usual hydrothermal vent activity we'd expect at these depths, but something that made the ROV's titanium frame resonate like a tuning fork. The acoustic sensors went haywire, picking up frequencies well below what the Earth's crust should produce. That's when Martinez, our senior drilling engineer, made the call that would haunt me forever. Take us deeper. We need to find the source. I still remember the date, March 14th, 1997. We were conducting preliminary surveys for a deep water drill site near the Mariana Trench. Nothing special, just another oil company pushing the boundaries of where we could extract from. The Mariana Explorer was state-of-the-art for its time, equipped with the latest dynamic positioning systems and a drilling capacity of up to 12,000 feet. We'd been on site for 3 weeks, and everything had been routine until that night. The control room was dimly lit, illuminated mostly by the glow of monitors. Johnson, our geologist, was explaining something about unusual magnetic readings when the first tremor hit. Not on the surface. We were used to the rig's constant motion, but on the seafloor feed, the ROV's cameras caught it. A hairline crack appearing in the sediment, dark water seeping up like blood from a cut. Pressure anomaly at sensor array 6. Martinez called out, his voice tense. 8,000 psi and climbing. That was impossible. The readings should have been steady at that depth. I adjusted the ROV's position to get a better look at the fissure. That's when we all saw it. A pulsing glow emanating from the crack, a deep bioluminescent blue that shouldn't exist at these depths. The temperature continued to rise, and the crack widened with frightening speed. The next few minutes are burned into my memory with terrible clarity. The seafloor literally split open, a chasm forming right before our eyes. The ROV's lights illuminated what looked like massive, ancient structures within. Geometric shapes that couldn't have formed naturally. But worse than that were the shadows moving in the depths. Massive, fluid shapes that defied description. What emerged from that chasm still haunts my dreams. At first, it appeared like a column of water moving against the current, but then it began to take form. The creature's surface was like looking at oil on water. Iridescent patterns that shifted and flowed across what I first thought was its skin. But there was no skin, not really. The outer layer was transparent, revealing layer upon layer of internal structures that seemed to fold into themselves impossibly. The primary mass was massive, easily larger than our entire drilling platform. But it was the appendages that defied explanation. They didn't move like tentacles or fins. Instead, they seemed to phase in and out of existence, leaving trailing after images in the water. The ROV's cameras captured clusters of what looked like eyes, but they weren't fixed in place. They shifted and merged, each one glowing with that same impossible blue bioluminescence. Most disturbing were the patterns. Across its surface, geometric shapes and symbols pulsed and shifted. Not random patterns, but clearly deliberate formations that reminded me of mathematical equations or an alien language. When the creature moved closer to the ROV, the patterns intensified, as if it was trying to communicate. I tried to back the ROV away, but the current was too strong. The feed began to distort, not with normal interference, but with patterns that matched those on the creature's surface. In the last few seconds before we lost connection, we saw something that defied physics. A portion of the creature's mass seemed to fold through itself, revealing structures that hurt to look at, geometries that shouldn't be possible in three-dimensional space. The feed cut out seconds later. We lost ROV 217 completely. But by then, we had bigger problems. The rig's seismic sensors were detecting movement. Something massive heading toward the continental shelf. Within hours, we had company. 3 Navy destroyers appeared on the horizon, and we were ordered to maintain radio silence. What happened next became the subject of one of the most elaborate cover-ups I've encountered. Within 24 hours, our entire crew was evacuated to the USS Nimitz. We were debriefed separately, interrogations that lasted for days. They were particularly interested in any personal recordings or data we might have saved. Most of the crew surrendered everything they had, but I managed to keep a backup drive hidden. The military response was massive but carefully concealed. 3 carrier groups coordinated operations under the cover of a routine naval exercise. The USS Seawolf, a Seawolf-class submarine specifically designed for deep-sea operations, reported multiple contacts with the entity. The sonar signatures were classified, but a friend in the Navy later told me they had to create entirely new classification protocols. The acoustic patterns didn't match anything in their database. The cover-up extended far beyond the military. Our company suddenly lost its drilling contract. The Mariana Explorer was decommissioned and scrapped within a year, highly unusual for a state-of-the-art platform. Every crew member was offered a significant bonus along with their non-disclosure agreement. Those who refused found themselves blacklisted from the industry. But information has a way of leaking. In 2003, a marine biologist studying deep-sea organisms near our incident site disappeared along with their entire research vessel. The official report blamed equipment failure, but I managed to contact one of the rescue team members. They described finding the ship intact, its crew missing, and its computers displaying the same mathematical patterns we'd seen on the creature. The aftermath of our encounter sparked a hidden avalanche of revelations. Through various channels, I discovered that certain governmental agencies had been tracking similar phenomena for decades. The USS Cyclops wasn't the only ship to disappear under mysterious circumstances in that region. Between 1975 and 1995, 4 research vessels reported encounters with anomalous biological entities before losing contact. All of these incidents were classified and buried in bureaucratic paperwork. In 2010, I was approached by an oceanographer who'd been studying low-frequency acoustic signatures in the Pacific. She showed me data suggesting that whatever we encountered wasn't alone. Similar acoustic patterns had been detected in other deep ocean trenches around the Pacific Rim. The frequencies matched what we'd recorded just before losing ROV 217. The government's efforts to suppress information became increasingly sophisticated. Disinformation campaigns attributed sightings to known marine species. Scientific papers describing unusual deep-sea phenomena were quietly withdrawn from publication. Research funding for deep ocean studies in certain areas was mysteriously cut. But the most compelling evidence came last year. A routine deep-sea mapping project by the discovered something unusual. The seafloor topology around our incident site had changed dramatically. A series of perfectly geometric depressions now marked the area, forming patterns similar to those we'd seen on the creature. The data was quickly classified, but not before several researchers noted that the formations appeared to be expanding. I don't pilot ROVs anymore. I took a desk job designing them instead. But sometimes, late at night, I pull up bathymetric maps of the Mariana Trench. The latest surveys show the seafloor has changed since 1997. There's a new topographical feature there now, a massive circular depression that the public doesn't know about. And according to classified Navy logs that leaked last year, something down there is still moving. What troubles me most isn't the creature itself, though God knows that's disturbing enough. It's the implications of those geometric structures we saw in the chasm. They suggested purpose, design, intelligence. Sometimes I wonder if what we encountered wasn't just a creature, but a sentinel, something left behind to guard whatever those ancient structures were hiding. If so, the question remains, who or what built them? And more importantly, are they coming back? I've been a journalist for 15 years, covering everything from local politics to natural disasters. But nothing in my career could have prepared me for what happened in Lost Pine Valley last January. I'm writing this account not because I think anyone will believe me, but because someone needs to know what happened to those 312 people, and why no one can find that town anymore. It was supposed to be a simple piece. America's forgotten mountain towns. The last bastions of solitude. That's what my editor called it. A 4-part series exploring communities that still existed off the beaten path. Lost Pine Valley was my 3rd stop, and it started snowing the moment I passed the town limits. I remember checking the forecast before driving up. Clear skies for days. That should have been my first warning. But I was more focused on the story I'd planned to write. The charming tale of a town that time forgot, where people still left their doors unlocked and kids played in the streets until sunset. The kind of wholesome, nostalgic piece that readers eat up. The snow was different. Even through my windshield, I could tell something was wrong. It fell too slowly, like each flake was suspended in honey. And it was warm. The temperature gauge on my rental car read 75 degrees Fahrenheit, but there it was. Thick, heavy snow coating everything in sight. Each flake seemed to pulse with its own inner light, like tiny hearts beating against the darkening sky. I pulled over at Miller's General Store, the only business on the main street still open at dusk. The old man behind the counter was staring out the window, his face pale. "Never seen snow like this," he whispered, pressing his hand against the glass. "It's warm." His breath left no fog on the window, I noticed. As if the glass itself was as warm as summer. That's when I noticed the color. Not the pristine white you'd expect, but a pale pink, darkening to crimson where it piled up against the buildings. My phone's weather app still showed clear skies, but I had 5 bars of signal. I took a video and sent it to my editor with the caption, "Something weird happening in Lost Pine Valley. Red snow. Investigating." That was the last normal moment I experienced. I spent that night in the Valley View Motel, room 212. Sleep came uneasily. The snow made no sound as it fell. There should have been that subtle shushing sound that snowfall always brings, but instead there was only silence. Complete silence. No cars, no wind, no distant barking dogs. Just the occasional soft thud of snow sliding off a roof, landing with what sounded almost like a satisfied sigh. By morning, the snow was 6 inches deep and the color of fresh blood. The air felt thick, almost gelatinous. When I tried calling out, all I got was static, even with full signal. Internet worked, but emails bounced back. Text messages showed as delivered but never got responses. The local news channel showed only a test pattern, but with colors that seemed somehow wrong. The first changes started in the animals. I watched Mrs. Henderson's cat from my motel window. Its fur fell out in clumps as it walked through the snow, skin bubbling like boiling water. Within hours, it wasn't a cat anymore. I don't have words for what it became. The closest I can come is to say it looked like something a child might draw if they only had a vague idea of what a cat was supposed to be, and their pencil kept slipping into dimensions that shouldn't exist. People stayed inside at first. We're not stupid. But you can't stay locked up forever. Even with power still running and water still flowing, people needed to check on family, get supplies, try to leave. Johnny Chen, the high school science teacher, was the first person I saw it happen to. He made a run for his car, planning to drive down the mountain. The snow touched his hand as he brushed it off his door handle. I documented everything through my lens, professional habits dying hard. His skin turned translucent first, like wax paper held up to light. Then the shifting started. Bones moved under his skin like snakes, rearranging themselves. He screamed until his jaw dislocated, splitting horizontally. The worst part, he didn't die. None of them died. When the transformation finished, he stood there swaying, his new form catching the light in ways that hurt my eyes. Then he walked to the town square and began to dance, movements that no human joints could make. Days passed. I watched from my second-floor window as more townspeople transformed. Some melted like candles in reverse, flesh flowing upward against gravity. Others developed crystalline growths that chimed in the wind. A few just opened up, their bodies becoming doors to spaces that shouldn't exist. The snow kept falling, and with each inch, more people changed. The Henderson family tried to run. I watched them pack their SUV in the pre-dawn darkness, bundled up in what looked like hazmat suits made from trash bags and duct tape. They made it half a mile before their car hit a drift of the red snow. The vehicle shifted. Metal and flesh merged as the snow climbed up the wheels. The last I saw of them, the car had become something organic, pulsing with a light that made my teeth ache, and the family inside was singing in harmonies that shouldn't be possible with human vocal cords. The town's church bell began ringing on day 4, though no one was pulling the rope. It rang in patterns, not random, but not any sequence I recognized. Sometimes it seemed to be counting down. Other times it felt like it was spelling out words in some mathematical language I couldn't grasp. The transformed ones would stop their dancing when it rang, all turning to face the bell tower in perfect synchronization. I'm not immune. I know that now. There's a patch on my left arm where I accidentally brushed against the windowsill. The snow had seeped through a crack. The skin there is turning translucent, and underneath, I can see something moving. Something geometric. Shapes that fold in on themselves in ways that make my head hurt if I look too long. The patterns are spreading, and with them comes understanding. The snow is still falling. It's 3 feet deep now. The transformed ones gather in the town square each night, swaying in patterns I can't understand but can't stop watching. Their movements remind me of code, or mathematics too complex for human minds. Sometimes I catch myself swaying too, my body remembering rhythms it never learned. Last night I dreamed I was standing in the snow, letting it fall on my skin. In the dream, the transformation didn't hurt. It felt like waking up, like finally understanding a language I'd been hearing all my life but never comprehended. When I woke up, I found myself standing at the open window, arm outstretched to catch the falling crimson flakes. My camera stopped working yesterday. The lens twisted itself into a spiral. My phone still works, still shows full signal, still connects to the internet that can't reach beyond the valley. I'm using it to type this warning. The screen flickers sometimes, showing reflections that aren't there. Faces that might be mine, if humans had evolved along a different path. If you're reading this, don't come looking for Lost Pine Valley. Don't try to find us. The snow is still falling, and we're still changing. I think we're becoming something else, something new. My arm is almost entirely translucent now, and the patterns underneath are beautiful in a way that makes me want to scream. The geometries make sense in a way they shouldn't. I understand now why the transformed ones dance. The snow isn't snow at all. It's not blood either, though it looks like it. It's something else, something that's been waiting to find us. Something that's been patient for so long, sleeping in the spaces between spaces, dreaming of the shapes we could become. And it's still falling. I can hear the church bells ringing again. The pattern is different this time. For the first time, I think I understand what they're saying. It's an invitation. I've spent the last 3 months trying to convince myself that what I discovered in the seismology lab wasn't real. But last night, as I sat alone reviewing the data for the 100th time, the ground beneath the research station didn't just tremor. It exhaled. And for the first time, I understood what it was trying to tell us. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and until recently, I was a research seismologist at the Wellington Earth Science Observatory. I graduated top of my class from Victoria University, and this position was my dream job. studying seismic patterns in one of the most geologically active regions in the world. What I'm about to share isn't easy to explain, and I know how it might sound. But I need to document this, even if no one believes me. Even if they come for these notes after I'm gone. March 15th. It started with anomalies in our routine seismic monitoring. Tiny tremors, barely registering on our equipment, but occurring in patterns I'd never seen before. Most of my colleagues dismissed them as equipment artifacts or normal background noise. But something about their regularity bothered me. Natural earthquakes don't behave this way. They don't follow patterns. These did. March 23rd. I modified our detection equipment, increasing sensitivity beyond standard parameters. Dr. Harrison, my supervisor, said I was wasting time chasing ghost signals, but I knew what I was seeing in the data wasn't noise. The tremors had a structure to them, like Morse code tapped out from deep within the earth. April 2nd. I began staying late, analyzing the patterns. The tremors weren't random. They followed a mathematical sequence that defied natural earthquake behavior. They'd repeat every 4.3 hours, like clockwork, but each sequence was slightly different from the last. It was like watching someone adjust their pitch, trying to find the right frequency. The pattern reminded me of language acquisition, how children learn to form sounds before words. April 15th. The headache started today. At first, I thought it was from staring at screens too long, analyzing data. But it's different. A deep, pulsing sensation that synchronizes with the tremors. None of my colleagues report feeling anything similar. Am I imagining things? The medical literature mentions cases of seismologists developing heightened sensitivity to ground movements, but this feels different. April 28th. The first time I felt it physically, I was alone in the lab at 2 a.m. A subtle vibration through the floor, different from normal seismic activity. It didn't travel outward in waves. It pulsed upward, like something pressing against the Earth's surface from below. The sensation lasted exactly 12 seconds. I checked our most sensitive equipment, but it hadn't registered anything. The security cameras caught me standing there, hand pressed to the floor, but missed the strange shadows that seemed to ripple across the walls. May 15th. I discovered a pattern in the data that changed everything. When converted to audio frequencies, the tremor sequences formed distinct wavelengths. Not random noise, but structured patterns similar to phonemes in human speech. I spent weeks developing an algorithm to analyze these patterns, converting seismic waves into sound. My hands shook as I processed the first conversion. Something about those wavelengths seemed familiar, like a half-remembered song from childhood. May 30th. The dream started. In them, I'm deep underground, surrounded by darkness that feels alive. There's a pressure in my ears, like being underwater, and voices that seem to come from the rocks themselves. I wake up with my sheets soaked in sweat, my teeth aching from grinding them. The patterns are affecting me more than I want to admit. June 8th. What I heard in my headphones that night still haunts me. The converted signals weren't just noise. They were whispers, distorted, deep, and barely comprehensible, but undeniably trying to form words. I could make out one phrase, repeated over and over. We rise. I played it for Dr. Harrison, but he only heard seismic static. How am I the only one who can understand them? June 20th. The tremors intensified. My colleagues finally noticed, but their instruments showed normal tectonic activity. Only my modified equipment could detect the true patterns. The whispers became clearer. We have waited. We rise. We remember. I've started recording everything, keeping detailed logs. The voice recognition software crashes every time I try to analyze the recordings, but I know what I heard. June 25th. Today I found historical records that change everything. In 1886, a local geologist named James Crawford documented similar patterns before the great earthquake that reshaped the harbor. His notes mentioned voices in the ground and ancient things stirring. They committed him to an asylum 3 days later. The earthquake struck the next week, exactly as he predicted. July 3rd. I tried presenting my findings to the department head. The data was clear. These weren't natural phenomena. The pattern showed intelligence, purpose. They called it stress-induced pattern recognition. Said I needed rest. But that night, alone in my apartment, I felt the floor vibrate in a way that made my teeth ache. The whispers came through the ground itself.
You hear us?
I wasn't using any equipment. This was direct contact. July 10th. I found more references in historical records. Every major earthquake in Wellington's history was preceded by reports of strange sounds, unexplained tremors, and people claiming to hear voices in the ground. All were dismissed as hysteria or superstition. But they knew. They all knew something was down there. July 15th. The patterns changed. They became more complex, like multiple voices speaking at once. I mapped them across the region. They formed a geometric pattern, centering on points deep beneath the city. Points that, according to geological surveys, shouldn't exist. The pattern looks like a circuit, or a ritual circle from those ancient petroglyphs found in the caves last year. July 22nd. I've stopped sleeping. The whispers are constant now. They talk about remembering, about a time before the sky was empty, about returning. I've cross-referenced their patterns with every known language, every geological event in recorded history. Nothing matches. This is something older, something that was here before us. July 28th. Last night everything changed. The tremors peaked at 3:17 a.m. Standing in the lab, I felt the floor shift beneath me. Not violently, but purposefully. The whispers came through clearly, no equipment needed.
We have waited long enough.
The ground felt different under my feet, like something vast shifting in its sleep. I'm writing this now because I don't know what happens next. The patterns indicate something massive building beneath us, but no one will listen. The official seismic data shows nothing unusual, yet I feel them getting closer to the surface. The whispers are clearer every day. This morning I submitted my resignation and packed up my research. I'm taking my modified equipment home. It's the only way to monitor what's coming. The patterns suggest we have days, maybe hours before whatever's down there reaches its threshold. I don't know if they're ancient creatures, forgotten gods, or something we don't have words for yet. To anyone reading this, if you feel the ground move in ways it shouldn't, if you hear whispers in the earth, you're not crazy. They're real. They're awake. And they remember us. The last entry, July 30th. The pattern is complete. I can see it now. The geometric shape they've been drawing with their movements. It's not just a pattern. It's a key. They're not trying to break free. They're trying to unlock something. And I think they just succeeded. The ground is moving as I write this, not shaking, breathing. I can hear them so clearly now, rising from depths we never knew existed. I should be terrified, but I'm not. I understand now. They weren't speaking to us. They were speaking through us. And now they're coming home. If you're enjoying these chilling stories about the unseen catastrophes happening all around us, make sure to hit that like button. It helps more people discover the unsettling truth. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale of horrors hidden just beneath the surface. There's so much more to uncover, and trust me, the worst is yet to come. The sky was still gray, even hours after the wave had passed. It wasn't like the usual aftermath of a storm. No relief in the air, no calm after the chaos. Everything was coated in a damp, sickly sheen. As the sun fought to push through the heavy clouds, I wished it would stay hidden. Something about the light touching the land after that wave made my skin crawl. We thought it was over. The surge hit just before dawn, with barely any warning. Most of the town was still asleep, unaware that their lives were about to be swallowed whole. They'd called us in from nearby regions. A small coastal town, a place barely anyone had heard of. The kind of place where everyone knew each other, but no one outside of it cared. As part of the rescue team, we had seen disasters like this before. Floods, hurricanes, the works. It was always a race against time. Get in, get people out, and count the losses later. But nothing could have prepared us for this. Nothing about this was natural. The first sign was the smell. I noticed it the moment we stepped off the truck. It wasn't the usual briny tang of seawater or the pungent rot of washed-up debris. It was something else. Something sour and faintly metallic. I didn't think much of it at first. We had a job to do. The streets were a mess, buried in mud, debris, and a strange, sticky residue. At first glance, it looked like just another tragic scene. Collapsed houses, cars overturned, remnants of lives strewn everywhere. But as we began searching for survivors, I saw something that made my stomach drop. In the middle of the road, half buried in mud, was a man. His body was intact, no signs of physical injury, but his skin. It was covered in something, a fleshy, pulsing mass clinging to him like leeches. It looked wet, alive, like it was feeding off him. Jesus. Someone whispered behind me. Another rescuer, Carlos, leaned in closer, hesitating as if he wasn't sure whether to check for a pulse. Before he could reach the man's neck, the mass shifted. It twitched, tightening around the body like it had sensed us. We both stumbled back, instinct taking over before the horror could even settle in. "What the hell is that?" Carlos muttered, his voice tight. I didn't answer. I didn't know. We left the body where it was, radioing the rest of the team about what we'd seen. They told us to stay focused. There were more survivors to find. I wanted to believe it was an anomaly, something from the ocean that had clung to the wreckage and would dry up, die off. But deep down, I knew better. We pressed on, searching house after house. The weird, fleshy residue was everywhere, sticking to debris, slithering along walls. It was subtle at first, but the more I looked, the more I realized it was spreading, slow and insidious, like it had a purpose. By the time we reached the town's center, we had found 3 more bodies, all wrapped in the same horrifying substance. Some were still twitching, alive beneath the flesh, but it wasn't them moving anymore. It was the thing. The sun was starting to lower when we found her. A little girl, no more than 8, crouched inside what remained of a cafe. She was covered in the stuff, but she was still breathing. Her eyes were wide, terrified as she stared at us like she'd been waiting for someone. She didn't scream when we approached, didn't move. Carlos and I tried to lift her, but she shook her head violently, pointing at her arms, her legs. "They're inside me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can feel them." Before I could even react, the mass around her began to move. It tightened, contracting like muscles beneath skin. She let out a shriek, her body convulsing as the fleshy substance wrapped tighter around her limbs, dragging her down. Carlos grabbed my arm, pulling me back as I tried to reach for her. But there was no saving her. We ran. I don't remember much about those next few hours. Just that we ran. Behind us, the town was being devoured. Not by water, but by this parasitic nightmare that the wave had left behind. The wave had been alive, something born from the sea, and now it was consuming everything it touched. We lost contact with the others. One by one, our radios fell silent. The last thing I heard was a garbled scream, cut off by static. By nightfall, there were only 3 of us left. We holed up in a fire station at the edge of town, hoping the wave's reach wouldn't extend this far. But it was everywhere. The sticky, fleshy mass crept along the streets, up walls, through cracks in the pavement. It wasn't fast, but it didn't need to be. It just kept spreading, inch by inch, relentless. We barricaded the doors, watching in horror as the stuff seeped under the cracks, sliding across the floor like it was hunting us. Carlos tried burning it with a torch we found in the wreckage, but the moment the flames touched it, the substance recoiled, tightening like a muscle, before shooting toward him. It latched onto his arm, spreading up to his shoulder in seconds. He screamed as it burrowed into his skin. I couldn't save him. I watched it consume him, piece by piece, until nothing remained but a husk of flesh and bone. I was next. I knew it. There was no escape. But somehow, I survived. I don't remember how I got out. The next thing I knew, I was outside the town, standing at the edge of the shore, watching as the wave receded. The mass had spread through most of the town by then, leaving behind nothing but destruction and death. The buildings were half collapsed, swallowed by the sea of flesh. They found me hours later, wandering along the coast. The rest of the team, the survivors, the town itself. Gone. All gone, swallowed by that thing. I spent days in the hospital after they found me, barely able to speak, my mind still trapped in the images of that day. They didn't believe me when I told them what I'd seen. How could they? They thought it was shock, trauma playing tricks on me. But I know the truth. I watched the news coverage afterward, saw how they tried to explain the destruction as a freak natural disaster. A tsunami, they said, an anomaly caused by tectonic shifts beneath the ocean. A rare but plausible event. But they didn't see what I saw. They didn't know what it left behind. I don't expect you to believe me either, but I know what I saw. That wave wasn't water. It was alive. And it's still out there somewhere, waiting for the next town, the next shore, the next group of people to consume. The ocean is quiet now, but I can't shake the feeling that it's watching, waiting. And when it comes back, there won't be anyone left to warn. The air was thick with smoke, and the sky was an unnatural shade of orange, even in the dead of night. I wasn't new to forest fires. I'd seen my fair share of flames roaring through dry forests, their speed terrifying, but never like this. Nothing about this fire made sense. That's when I saw them. Glowing orbs hovering just above the tree line. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, but they were real. And they were moving. I'd been dispatched to the small town of Whetstone, somewhere most people couldn't even point to on a map, the kind of place that doesn't make the news. A forest fire had broken out, spreading at an alarming rate. Local authorities were stumped, unable to control it despite their best efforts. My job was to assess the fire's cause, and at first I thought I was dealing with a standard case, a careless camper or a lightning strike. But as I made my way into the charred remains of the forest, everything felt wrong. The trees weren't just burnt. They were obliterated, like something had torn through them from the inside. The scorch patterns were unusual, not spreading out naturally from a single ignition point. It was almost as if the flames had erupted simultaneously across multiple areas. Locals were whispering about the lights. Floating, glowing orbs they'd seen darting through the sky before the blaze started. I didn't buy it, at least not at first. But when I saw them myself, flickering like distant stars but much too close, I felt a cold dread sink into my chest. These weren't normal lights. And the fire seemed to follow them. I approached one of the surviving trees, half burnt, but still standing. Something strange caught my eye. The bark wasn't just charred. It was fused, like it had been struck by a concentrated blast of heat in a split second. There were no signs of a lightning strike, no storm on the radar. Whatever caused this fire, it didn't come from the ground. Then the weather changed. Without warning, a gust of hot wind blew through the forest, nearly knocking me off my feet. I could hear the crackling of flames in the distance, but the fire hadn't reached me yet. The sky darkened unnaturally fast, clouds swirling above like a storm was brewing. But this wasn't a storm. It was something else. A loud crack split the air, and I turned just in time to see a bolt of light shoot from the sky. Not lightning, but something. Brighter, stranger. It struck the earth with a force that shook the ground beneath my boots. The air shimmered, and in that moment I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A deep, primal fear. Whatever this was, it wasn't natural. The bolt of light disappeared as quickly as it came, leaving a smoldering crater in its wake. My heart pounded as I stumbled back, my mind racing to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was some kind of freak weather phenomenon. A rogue lightning bolt, a spontaneous combustion of gas pockets underground. But the lights, those floating orbs, kept drifting through the haze, and as they moved, the fire seemed to follow, obedient, like it was being guided. I made my way deeper into the forest, drawn to the orbs despite every instinct telling me to turn back. The air was stifling, each breath a struggle as the heat pressed in from all sides. I could see the glow of the fire intensifying in the distance, faster than it should have been spreading. I'd never seen a fire behave this way. Growing in leaps and bounds, tearing through the forest, like it had a mind of its own. Suddenly, the wind shifted again, a howl ripping through the trees, bending the few that remained. I braced myself, crouching low to avoid the debris flying past, and that's when I saw it, something far above, barely visible through the smoke. It wasn't a plane. It was too high, too still. A dark shape hovered in the sky, partially hidden by the swirling clouds and smoke, like a shadow against the burning horizon. It didn't make sense, but it was there, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching. The temperature spiked, and the ground beneath me trembled as another blast of light shot from the sky, this time further ahead. A new fire exploded into life just yards away, the flames licking at the trees with a hunger I'd never seen before. I sprinted in the opposite direction, my mind numb, my body running on pure survival instinct. As I glanced back, I saw the orbs again, weaving through the fire, gliding as if they were searching. I managed to reach the fire break, panting and drenched in sweat. The town's fire chief, Jim, stood there, his eyes wide and his face pale. "You see him too, didn't you?" he rasped. He didn't wait for my answer. "The lights. They ain't just fire, man. It's something else." I nodded, too shaken to speak, my hands trembling as I wiped the soot from my face. Jim muttered something about the old-timers, how they'd warned about strange things in these parts, lights in the sky that always preceded something terrible. Most folks wrote it off as folklore, but now I wasn't so sure. The fires weren't behaving naturally. They were spreading faster than any fire I'd ever seen, as though being fueled by something beyond our control. And the lights. They weren't just watching, they were controlling the destruction. Night fell, and the fires raged on. The whole town had been evacuated by then, the roads clogged with panicked drivers trying to flee. I stayed behind with the other investigators, trying to make sense of the chaos, but there were no answers. Every theory we threw at the fire fell apart as quickly as we thought of it. The next morning, I decided to return to the crater where the first bolt of light had hit. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe, or just a need to understand what the hell was going on. The fire had swept through, leaving only ash and embers, but the crater was untouched. It was as if the fire had deliberately avoided that spot. I crouched down, examining the soil. It was scorched but not burnt, like something had seared it from the inside out. And then I found something. A shard of glass or metal, I couldn't tell. It shimmered faintly in the daylight, reflecting an unnatural light. I pocketed it without thinking. That night, back at the station, I ran every test I could on the shard, but the results came back blank. It wasn't anything I could identify. No known elements, no traces of any metal we'd ever seen. I called in a favor from a colleague at a nearby lab, hoping they could make sense of it, But before they could even get their hands on it, the shard had changed. It had dissolved, disintegrated into nothing. I didn't mention the lights to anyone officially. I couldn't. I'd sound insane. But Jim and I, we knew. We had seen it. The orbs, the fires, the strange shape in the sky. It wasn't just a freak accident. It was something else. Something we couldn't explain. Weeks passed, and the fires eventually died down, though the damage was catastrophic. People started returning to Whetstone, rebuilding what they could. Life went on, as it always does after disaster strikes. But the questions lingered. What had really caused the fire? Was it a natural phenomenon? Some new kind of lightning we'd never seen before? Or something much stranger? I'm still haunted by that night. By the lights, the heat, and the overwhelming feeling that we were being watched, studied even. I can't shake the image of the dark shape hovering in the sky, nor the orbs that seemed to dance through the flames like they were alive. I never spoke about it again, not to anyone who hadn't been there, but every so often I'll hear stories from other investigators. Reports of strange lights in the sky, unexplained fires, and bizarre weather patterns. They never make the news. They're always written off as freak accidents, electrical storms, or human error. But I know better. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't natural. It was something else. And that's just one of the many unreported catastrophes happening in our world. Events that most people will never know about. If you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll be the first to hear the next terrifying discovery. Don't forget to like the video if it kept you on edge, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. And remember, the truth is often far more terrifying than we think.